I recognize the member for Toronto-Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to start off by saying that I'll be sharing my lead time today with the members from Oshawa and from Nickel Belt, and I will be mostly speaking to the environmental sections of this bill, but I also want to note that in this bill, the work of the government with its Bill 5 with regard to endangered species is being continued. I can see no reason on earth why we would support the expansion of the activities of Bill 5 and the ongoing threat to endangered species. So I would urge people on the basis of those 2 points alone to reject this bill. While the title of the bill, Building a More Competitive Economy Act, which includes getting rid of photo radar, so that's kind of weird. While the title suggests economic progress, the first schedule makes changes to the Clean Water Act 2006 that I think should concern everyone in Ontario who values safe drinking water. And the changes are being promoted as simply technical, that they're being used to balance the need for development against the need for safety, with an assurance from the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks that, in fact, safety will be protected. But I have to say to you, Speaker, when you play with clean water, you are playing Russian roulette with people's lives. Remember, the Clean Water Act came into being because in May of 2000, town of Walkerton experienced a tragedy that shook this province. 7 people died and more than 2,300 fell ill due to E. coli contamination in municipal water system. And the people who fell ill, most recovered, but many had ongoing life-changing damage. So when you deal with water safety, you have to recognize that you are playing with very serious matters. In that case, the contamination was caused by manure runoff following heavy rains and the failure of the water treatment monitoring and notification systems. The Walkerton inquiry, led by Justice Dennis O'Connor, produced 121 recommendations to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. And one of the most significant outcomes of that inquiry was the Clean Water Act passed in 2006. It established source protection plans, empowered conservation authorities, and it mandated ministerial oversight to ensure the safety of municipal drinking water systems. It was a landmark piece of legislation to protect public health. It was a piece of legislation that we needed, clearly, and a piece of legislation that in Ontario has generally been recognized as one that is critical to defend if we want to make sure we don't have a repeat of the Walkerton experience. But now with Bill 56, this government is proposing changes that further undermine those protections. And I say further because the government's already in the past, since it came into power in 2018, put through 2 bills that undermined the Ontario Clean Water Act. Schedule 1 introduces amendments, as I said, that are argued to be technical but can have far-reaching consequences. For example, if the minister fails to respond to proposed amendments to source protection plans within 120 days, those amendments are deemed approved. And I think that removes a critical layer of oversight and accountability. Everyone in this building knows that schedules are disrupted. Events happen. Ministers and governments get sidetracked. And the idea that because some other event came along and a minister or the minister's office was not able to keep track of a critical issue like this, that it would automatically result in an approval is not acceptable. Does not make sense. Does not make sense. The bill allows the minister to prescribe the wording of policies and source protection plans, which has the potential to weaken local protections. It limits the types of policies that can be included for activities deemed significant threats to drinking water. This is not streamlining. It's stripping away the very safeguards that were put in place to prevent another Walkerton. The Canadian Environmental Law Association, which has followed this issue now for over 20 years, has been very vocal in its criticism of the government's approach to the Clean Water Act. In a June 2023 posting, they warned two recent enactments, that's Bills 97 and Bill 23, seem to go out of their way to undermine existing laws, policies, and agencies created to prevent threats to drinking water following the Walkerton tragedy. And this bill before us just follows in those footsteps. This bill continues that undermining of the clean water protections that we realized needed to be put in place when their lack led to deaths and widespread illness. Bill 97 allowed ministerial zoning orders to override significant threat policies under the Clean Water Act. Seriously. How many Walkertons does it take before you think, hey, we have to be serious about protecting water at a very high level, because the consequences are quite literally deadly? Bill 23 undermines the role of conservation authorities, allowing development in lands that could be deemed hazardous, in wetlands, and removing pollution as a consideration in permit decisions. These changes erode the ability of conservation authorities to protect watersheds and drinking water resources. I actually was here in 2006. I had just been elected in a by-election that year and got to sit on the committee that traveled around Ontario and actually got to talk to the people who developed the Act. I had my criticisms, but their whole argument to us at the time was that if you want to ensure that water is clean and safe, you have to have defense in depth. You can't just rely on that last step of putting a small amount of chlorine into the water to kill bacteria. You have to make sure that the source of the water is protected. You have to make sure that the inspection systems are in place, that you have enforcement, that you have a variety of steps that protect the public. And unfortunately, that is something that seems to be lost on this government. Canadian Environmental Law Association's April 2025 analysis highlights the ongoing gaps in Ontario's drinking water protection regime. A recent report by the Auditor General found that over 3 million Ontarians rely on non-municipal drinking water systems, yet the province lacks effective oversight of those systems. And that's something that we criticized back in 2006, and we were told, well, that will be taken care of. Never was taken care of. This government has an opportunity with this bill to actually strengthen Clean Water Act, and it's not doing that, it's weakening it. The report from the Auditor General suggested the government did not have, said the government didn't have in place systems to oversee all non-municipal drinking water systems and ensure compliance with legislation and regulations, educate private well users about the risks of untreated water, identify and manage health risks related to those non-municipal drinking water systems. The Auditor General emphasized that this is not just a policy gap, it is a real and present health threat. The Ministries of Environment and Health, along with local public health units, accepted the 17 recommendations, but as Canadian Environmental Law Association points out, acceptance alone is not enough. The government must commit to timelines, and implementation must follow swiftly and decisively. I want to say, Speaker, I went to the Auditor General report and looked at the recommendations, and I have to say, the Auditor General, who does a pretty thorough job, we've been lucky, we've had good, competent, capable Auditor Generals who've dug into things pretty deeply, at no point said that the laws that were in place were impeding development. That was not the concern that came forward. That was not the concern that came forward. The recommendations recommend that the MECP, Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, explore ways to enhance its reporting to the public on all advice provided by the Advisory Council on Drinking Water Quality. There are recommendations to Ministry of Health as well, so I'm just going to deal with Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. And they recommended that Ministry of Energy, Environment, Conservation and Parks implement measures and efficiencies to further increase the rate of MECP inspections of non-municipal drinking water systems and set and meet formal inspection policies and targets for non-municipal drinking water systems that it regulates. They recommended, or the Auditor General recommended, that the MECP create outreach materials outlining exemption requirements and information about the risks of supplying and consuming untreated drinking water, and deliver them to owners, operators, and users of drinking water systems with treatment exemptions, and assess whether any regulatory amendments are needed to minimize the risks of not treating drinking water on the basis of periodic bacterial testing, recommending that the MECP develop and implement a plan to clear the backlog of submitted well records by inputting the outstanding information into the WELS database, develop and implement new processes to flag missing or inaccurate information in well records to improve the reliability and accuracy of MECP's information on wells, and develop and implement an IT system that enables MECP staff to manage and track information on wells in an effective, reliable, and timely manner. Few more. Recommend the MECP explore and implement options such as education to increase the number of properly decommissioned abandoned wells, and that the MECP create an updated feasibility assessment of potential measures to increase source water protections for non-municipal drinking water supplies, and based on the outcome of the assessment, consider whether any measures are suitable for implementation and consult with the public on any policy proposals. I note that the Auditor General at no point said, hey, you got too much duplication in the system. This is holding up development. This bill, this legislation, which may be good for protecting human health, seems to be making it difficult to build new homes. No, that is not what was said by the Auditor General. That is not what was said by the Auditor General. So I have to ask, where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? The argument made by the minister yesterday, and I listened to him and then I reread Hansard, was that duplication in the system and long timelines meant that it was very difficult to actually put in place new drinking water systems in a timely way, or put in place drinking water systems so that development could proceed. And frankly, I have my doubts about that, but very interestingly, in July, CBC reported that the Minister of the Environment for Ontario and the Alberta Environment Minister wrote to the Federal Environment Minister asking her to move away from legislation that they say would, quote, delay project development and undermine competitiveness. That legislation was introducing a bill that would enshrine clean drinking water rights in law. So the minister was going to the feds and saying, hey, you're going to enshrine the right to clean drinking water. That interferes with development. You've got to be kidding me. The reality is that ensuring that people across Ontario, and certainly First Nations who have been most deprived of access to clean drinking water, should be sacrificed, that their interests should be set aside. I'm sure that the minister was not freelancing. I can't imagine that the minister would write a letter to the federal government saying back off on clean water legislation without having the premier backing that minister to the hilt. Would not happen. So any argument that we should trust the government that they will protect clean water in this legislation does not fit with the facts, does not fit with the reality that this government opposed action at the federal level to ensure that everyone was protected and everyone had the opportunity to get clean water on a regular basis. Speaker, in a meeting with First Nations after that incident, the Premier said everyone deserves fresh drinking water. And yet, at the same time, we have this legislation coming forward to undermine that provision of fresh, clean drinking water. I mean, we've already seen with Bill 5 the threat, not just the threat, the initiative to implement special economic zones where provincial laws can be suspended in total in a particular area to facilitate an economic activity. And certainly we need economic activity. People need jobs, and people in this province need to have our economy grow. But setting aside our laws in order to do that makes no sense. We saw the consequences in Walkerton of not actually having regulations in place that protected people's lives and well-being. Canadian Environmental Law Association warns that the legislative changes before this one were setting the stage for Walkerton 2.0. The erosion of environmental protections, the marginalization of vulnerable communities, the prioritization of development over public health are deeply troubling. The Clean Water Act was a promise, an initiative, that we wouldn't allow our drinking water to be compromised in future. Bill 56 breaks that promise. I don't see how people can support this bill if for no other reason just because of its undermining of clean water protection. We need to stand with those communities who are at risk, and we need to ensure that the province makes it very clear that protecting public health and the environment are the highest priorities. People should not have their lives put at risk. Thank you.